is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 661. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your limited resources, and this time around, I'm your only limited resource. So Luis is actually out of town, and he's going to be on a trip for the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to have a couple of guests over the next two episodes, but thought about having a guest on for this one as well, as that's usually a good time to do it, right? Because Luis obviously is a very busy person. He's got a lot of stuff going on in his life. And so I usually like to take advantage of that when he can't make it on the show of having a guest. But I realized I haven't done a solo show in a while. I've done this a couple of times, and I'm always a little hesitant to do it because, well, generally shows like this are better with multiple people. It's also very difficult to do content like this just on your own. I found it's more difficult than you might think, but it's also been worth it. It's been kind of interesting, and it's been kind of a different look for the show just every once every year or two. Not talking about every other episode here, but just to throw in a little bit of a curveball. So for today, it's just going to be you and me, and we're going to be hanging out. I've got some special questions from our patrons that are a little more personal, a little more specific to Luis and I, and so maybe it'll be a little story time with Marshall today. Before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsors. First up is Channel Fireball. Make sure you check them out for all things magic related. Going through the transition now to TCG Player. I don't really know exactly when or how that's going to go, but for now, Channel Fireball is still the place to go. They've got the marketplace, which, you know, that's kind of the killer app, as it were, for these type of setups, because you get to search for not just one store, but multiple stores at once. And that way you can kind of tailor it to what you want. If you want really quick shipping, you can prioritize stores that do that. If you want the lowest possible price, you can prioritize stores that do that. Even if you want a specific condition of a card, you can prioritize that. So it really lets you kind of tailor it how you want, and that benefits, well, you. Lower prices as well, because they're competitive, right? They put a bunch of stores on one marketplace where you can literally just look at one store right next to the other and see what the pricing is. And that really creates a pricing equilibrium very quickly. It's kind of a true market, right? And that can be really good for the consumer as well. If you do pick up anything over at CFB, if you'd use the affiliate code LR at checkout, I do appreciate it. It helps out the show. It lets them know that we sent them over, that we sent you over. Basically, in this era of digital marketing, people want to know what they're getting out of their marketing dollars, right? So if we say, hey, if you put in this code, then they go, okay, so people actually do listen to LR and actually are being told about CFB or whatever, and that's why we ask you to do that. Anyway, do appreciate it. The show's also brought to you by FTX. That's your number one place to manage your digital assets. If you're looking to get in to that game, FTX is a place to do it. If you're within the United States, it's ftx.us, and outside is ftx.com. The reason for that is there's different regulatory frameworks depending on whether you're in the US or not. And that's one of the benefits, is that they are regulated and they are on the up and up with all of that stuff. So you know that if you go to ftx.us for our US-based customers, that can be part of the equation for you as well. Now, I will remind you, if you do want to do this, it is an investment. An investment of any kind involves risk, and you want to make sure that you know what the risks are before you get it. So make sure you consult an investment professional. Okay, let's do a crack-a-pack real quick, and then we'll jump into the questions and the story time and such, and maybe we can have some fun with it. So first up, for our Baldur's Gate Crack-a-Pack. Oh, and I've got a little story to say after this as well about the Arena Open. I was going to say remind me, but you probably can't do that. First card out, though, on our Crack-a-Pack is Underseller Myconid, which has been a real performer for me. That's the Tuna Green 1/2 that taps for any color, makes a 1/1 when it ETBs or when it dies. And yeah, I mean, this is a good card to open and one that I would already have my eye on. Guardian Naga, that's the 7 mana, 5 white, 5/6 with vigilance that doesn't that gets its damage prevented as long as it's your turn, and it lets you exile target artifact or enchantment at instant speed for its adventure cost of 2 and a white. This card has not really been something that's been on my radar. Deadly Dispute, yeah, this card's been pretty good. It's been reprinted multiple times now, and Deadly Dispute in this set definitely has a home. I would still take the Myconid over it. Pseudo Dragon Familiar, this one's just a victim of blue. not being supported enough. It's the 2 and a blue, 2/1 flyer, and you can pay 2 and a blue to give a creature flying until end of turn. That's a really solid common, but it's just in a sea of really not good stuff. Same thing with Timora's Invoker. That's the 1 and a blue 1/3 Orc Rogue, and you can pay 8 to draw 2 cards. Cool, but yeah, not really what this format's about. Mace of Disruption. Haven't actually seen this one on the battlefield or on my side or the other side. So yeah, I'm just going to say no to that one. Baleful Beholder. That's just a holdout from AFR. It's a bread and butter 6-drop that you can play if you need to, but you don't really want to. Valor Singer. Card's pretty good. 2 and a red, 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature gains +1/+0 until end of turn. It can be this thing, so it can be act as a 3/3, or you can give it to something that was already on the battlefield or something with evasion. Fine card. Ooh, Gorgeous George, Hill Giant Horde Gorger. That's a 4GG 7/6 it when it ETBs. You gain 3 life. Really just, it's really proven itself over multiple sets now, but it is not as good as the Myconid, so I wouldn't take it over it. Charm Sleep. Look, again, this is another fine, and we're getting okay blue comments, but they're just not the type of stuff that you need. Oh, God. Our first uncommon is Red Dragon, and this is going to probably lead into my little story, but 4 red for a 4/4 flyer. When it ETBs, it does 4 damage to each opponent. It's a nice one. Navigation Orb. This is the 3-mana artifact. You can pay 2, tap, and sack it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards or gates and reveal them. Put one of them on the battlefield, tapped in the other end of your hand, and then shuffle. Haven't really been playing that much. Too slow for the format. Next is Grave Choice. This is the 2 and a black instant. Target opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. If that creature had a mana value of 2 or less, conjure a duplicate of it into your hand. The duplicate perpetually gains. You may spend mana of any color to cast this spell. Medium. Fine. It's actually okay, but it is medium. I think I'd still take the Myconid or the Red Dragon at this point. But we do have a rare. Ooh, actually, it's a mythic rare. It's Champions of Tyr. This is 2 white for a 4/3 flying double team. And when Champions of Tyr enters the battlefield, you get a boon with when you cast your next creature spell. That creature enters the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter, a flying counter, or a lifelink counter on it. This is obviously going to be the pick, though it does beg the question, how good is this card rankings-wise? So I'm actually going to just take a second to look it up because I am curious. All right, it looks like it is pretty high. It's the 9th, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, ninth best card in the set. So again, it was obvious that we were going to take it. That was a no-brainer. But how good is it? It's amazing. It's also in white, which is a good place to be. So this pack ended up being pretty easy. I like the Myconid. I don't hate Red Dragon, but Champions of Tyr is going to be the pick. So before we get into the questions, I did want to mention, because this is going to be kind of past due by the time Luis is back, so I might as well just cover it, is the Arena Open happened, and this is the one with the 2 drafts, and so I kind of wanted to go over my thoughts and my experience with that. I had a little bit of a busy weekend, but I was able to work in some games and some matches. So on Saturday, I started off with what I would call a solid sealed pool, call it a 6 or a 7 out of 10, maybe something like that. And I had a really good, I was 4-1. I thought, okay, I'm in striking range here. And then 2 quick losses, just to magic-y stuff, mana screw, whatever. I was like, all right, well, I got to get back in, jump back in. The next pool I had was about a 3 or a 4, the deck, that I built out of the pool. And I ended up going 2-3 with it, or is it 2-2, whatever. I've got 2 wins with it and then lost. And then I jumped back in again and I got a pool that was maybe slightly better. We'll call it a 4.5. But it was pretty bad. Definitely felt like I'm going to need to run pretty hot to get to 7 with this deck. And I did not. I got to 4. But even that, honestly, I was running kind of hot. So yeah, that didn't work out super well. And so then I jumped in for a 4th try. Probably was going to be my last one. I had some time constraints. So it was like, all right, let's do this. And I opened a really nice deck, like one I was really happy with, very well rounded. And I was able to cruise to the 7 wins pretty easily. I think I was 7-1. So that locked up day 2. And if you didn't get to play in it or didn't hear when we talked about it last week, it's draft on day 2, which they've done once, but now it's 2 drafts and that's it. Like that's what you're doing. You're doing 2 drafts on day 2. And that's kind of the dream, right? Like when Luis and I have talked about this on the podcast, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way as well. I mean, that's the dream, right? I remember when Arena first came out a few years ago, and I thought, God, if one day we can play something that resembles like what a GP felt like, but at home, like how cool is that? And this is, in my mind, a better version of that, because a GP was a huge field and you had to do really well, to like top 8 in it, right? It was really difficult. And I mean, my best finishes at GPs were where I went X2 on day 1, which was, I mean, that was like 7-2. Like that's hard to do, right? And sealed. And then in day 2, I 2-1'd both of my drafts. And like, for me, it's like, well, I got to do better. And that's not a top 8. That's like a top 16, or depending on how big it is, you can be outside of that. It's going to be hard for me to do better than that, right? Like that's an extraordinarily good run of you need to go 8-1 or something, or win both of your drafts. Like that is really, really tough. Now, to be fair, I was probably 1 win away. Like if I had 3-0'd either of the drafts rather than 2-1 them, I had a decent shot at top 8. So, you are really knocking at the door at that point, but boy, that is a tough hill to climb. Here, it's a lot flatter in the sense that you have a good chunk of prize money within your sights, right? You can get to $2,500 if you can 3-0 both of your day 2 drafts. That's awesome, right? The downside is by flattening it like that, or by making it a little bit more attainable, the issue is they can't be forgiving. So it's single elimination. Like if you lose a match, you are done for the day. That's it. There is no, okay, I lost a match, but I can scrap out a 2-1 and then maybe 3-0 my next draft and still make top 8. That was kind of a common scenario at a GP. There's none of that here. Here it's draft or die, right? And so what ended up happening, I didn't understand this part, and it was a little bit of a lesson learned, but I set my alarm for the ungodly hour of 7:30 in the morning. And if you guys have listened to the show for a long time, I do not like to get up early. And I was like, oh God. So all I was going to do, because in previous versions of these arena opens, you had this 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. window to sign up. But if it was sealed, well, you just went back to sleep, woke up a couple hours later, and then boom, you could jump in, open up your pool and go for it. But that's not how the draft ones work. You sign up during that window and you draft. So like I hit the sign up button and I'm like, okay, I'm like halfway shutting my laptop and boom, I've got a pack in front of me. And I'm like, whoa. I got to wake up because now I have to do this draft right now. Now, the way it works overall is that you don't have to, you have until noon Pacific time, which is where I happen to live, to finish your 3 matches. So I could draft and go back to sleep for maybe a little while and then get up and make sure to finish my matches. But anyway, I was like, wow, I got to like slap, hey, wake up. Cause I got to focus on this draft and try to do the best I can. And the draft started out maybe slightly rocky, but it definitely came together. And I ended up with a deck that I was really happy with. I had one of the best cards in the set. I had Lae'zel, the warrior that's the double striking 2/4, which at least right now is the second best card in the whole set. And I moved over into white in order to take advantage of having gotten lucky and gotten this card. And I ended up with a good white-black deck, and I ended up splashing as well, which, to be fair, I would prefer not to, but the card, I actually got past Pack 1, Pick 2, a Raphael Fiendish Savior, which is a really solid card. It's not on the level of the other stuff, but, it's top 20, top 30 cards in the set or something. It's a legit bomb. It's the 4/4 flyer that pumps up your devils, imps, tieflings and demons or whatever. And when a thing dies on your end step, you get a 1/1 devil that when it dies, it pings something, and it's a 2/1, or a 2/2 when this guy's out. So really, really nice. And I had a easy enough splash. I had a walrus and stuff like that. So I splashed it, and I give my deck, honestly, I'd give it probably like an 8.5 or a 9. Like it wasn't one of those like, oh my God, situations where I was getting past just everything I ever wanted, but I had enough removal, and I had good stuff. I had sort of one of each of the 3 good black and white removal. I had the 1-drop one, I had the 4-drop one, I had the 3-drop one. And then, like I said, I had these 2 kind of bombs, and then I had a good amount of stuff in between, and I really focused on my curve as well, and my curve was good. So 9, 8.5, like really good deck, and I was quite happy with it. And so I couldn't fall back asleep. I did try actually, but I couldn't because I was kind of excited to play the deck and my brain was going. So I got up, had some breakfast, and then I was like, all right, let's battle. And so I sit down and I'm playing against red-green in the first round. And in the first game, my opponent had like kind of an awkward curve out in that they didn't really, and they stumbled a bit. And I had an amazing curve out. And so I just absolutely windmill slammed. It was one of those things where like I had played 4 creatures by the time they had played 1, and I killed that 1 creature attacked with everything. I had 3 creatures at that point. Then on my turn, I played a creature and killed their next creature, and it was like over, right? And so I'm up 1-0, and their deck doesn't look that great. Red-green, not really doing that much in the format. And I'm like, all right, I think I'm feeling really good about this. And so we continue, and we go into game number 2, and my opponent starts off by playing the let me just grab the name of this stupid card here. Not the Rabble Rouser, the one that gives haste. That's what it was. The Warcaller, yeah, Kobold Warcaller on turn 1, and it's like, okay, that card is when it comes down on turn 1, it can really perform, right? It's a decent playable, but when you do see it on turn 1, it's pretty scary. And sure enough, they went 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop after that. But here's the thing. I had a really good hand. Like I had a great hand, I would say, where I was able to get my bomb down. So that, matters a lot. And then which was the, what's it called? Lae'zel? Yeah. And so I got that thing down, and then I was kind of waiting for the red mana to come around to get Raphael down, which I had also drawn. And I actually did manage to get that down. But the turn that I did that, and my opponent had been hyper aggressive, like attacking me, like even throwing away creatures sometimes, like really, really aggressive. So I was really trying to stabilize. And I was taking very conservative lines, like even trading off some pretty good creatures just to keep my life total high because my hand was stacked and I felt like going into the late game, I would have a good advantage over red-green. And so I did stabilize, but they had a really important turn where they were able to force me to trade off. They played Gut Fanatical Priestess, and that fights something, but they also had the ability to pump it straight away and give it haste. So it came down, they pump spelled it, and then it fought or whatever, and it had haste because of the Warcaller, and that forced me to trade off Raphael for it. And I was like, okay, but that's fine, right? Like I can still do this. I'm at 4, like I'm good to go. It's okay. And so I'm hanging in there and really just focusing my absolute best on keeping my life total as high as possible, because I knew that my opponent with their insanely aggressive line was really trying to just, kill me with what they had on the battlefield. And so after the dust settles on all of this, I get really lucky. My opponent, through their hyper aggressive action, has gotten me down to just 1 life. And after all the dust had settled, they had 2 creatures. They had a 3/1 and a 1/1. And I had Lae'zel. Okay, I had just the 3/2. At that point, it was a 3/2 double strike for whatever. I think, whatever. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, it was a double striker, and it was there. So I have a swamp in my hand, and I draw my card for the turn. And obviously I need something because my opponent has been hyper aggressive. They are definitely going to attack both creatures in and just say, do you have it? So I need a blocker. I need a removal spell. I need some action. And I find it. I find Patriarch's Retribution or whatever it's called. And I'm like, oh my, this is like the perfect draw. Humiliation, not Retribution. This is like the perfect draw. right? Because it's an instant that can kill one of the creatures. So my opponent is going to attack me with both, I believe. And they're going to say, do you have it? And if I do, especially if it's instant speed removal, I get to kill one creature and block the other with my double striker, thus killing it. And then I get to start attacking potentially, right? Because now they don't have a board at all. So I'm like, go. And they think about it for a minute. They had an equipment. They put it on a thing. And then they do attack with both. And I'm like, yes. So I kill one of it with Patriarch's Humiliation. I block the other with my double striker. And they have no board. They don't make a play either. I think they played a land or did nothing. So then they pass it back to me. And I'm like, all right, well, it's time to go. So I attack with my 3-power double striker for 6, right? And their life total is going to plummet really quickly. And I also drew a creature. So now I've got like a backup plan against some haster and a 2-turn clock. And I'm like, okay, I finally turned the corner on what was a very, like, again, I had to make a lot of decisions to try to keep my life total as high as I possibly could. And I'm like, okay, I think I got this. Like, this is looking really good. And then they top deck their card and they play Uthgard Fury, which is the 1 red enchantment. When it ATBs, it does 4 damage to any target and they kill me. Okay, that's a bad beat. That sucks. But I mean, to be fair to my opponent, they did attack me down and they were very reckless about it. But I mean, this did open up this type of top deck for them winning. So they did. And I'm like, that's so disappointing, right? Because there's like this big tense moment where you think, okay, I got this. And then it's gone. So we go to game 3 and we have a very similar game play out where it's crazy, like fully built out board. I get to play both of my bombs again. But once again, my opponent has been hyper aggressive and I'm in a very defensive stance at this point. And I'm trying really, really hard to, again, just keep my life total high. Also because I don't want to get nabbed by that stupid enchantment. Good news is they draw it and play it kind of in the middle of the game. And they kill one of my creatures. And we continue playing from there. But once again, they had the Haste Giver guy. And I was looking really stable. Like seriously, like my life total was pretty high. And I think I was in pretty good shape. And then they gave a thing haste in their hand. And I'm like, okay. And they play Battlecry Goblin. And that's the uncommon, the 1 in a red 2/2. And you can pay 1 in a red to have goblins you control get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. And of course, it's a goblin, so that can work on itself. And then whenever it attacks, if it has pack tactics, then you get a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking as well. And you can pump that too. So they also have the 3/1 that has pack tactics. It gets first strike. So I'm in a bit of a pickle here because that's a goblin. They have this, they have the one that's going to attack. And then they also had another one, like a token or something. So they tank it out for quite a while into my very well built out board and they attack with everything. And I'm like, oh man, I have to do whatever I can do to try to keep my life total high again. So one card that they didn't know that I had though was the 2/2 flash for 1 and a white. So that made it so that their attack was no longer lethal and in fact gave me a trade for the goblin. And I was able to make pretty good blocks, but my life total did fall down to 3. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not great. But my opponent really did kind of sacrifice their board here and they were out of cards. They had nothing left. So I once again start attacking with my double striker. And once again, I've now turned the corner and it's a really fast clock. But this time they've already used up their stupid do 4 damage to any target rare. So I'm like, okay, but I'm recognizing that, hey, I need to put the pedal to the metal here. Let's get this game over with because I have now fully stabilized. And even though they made me trade off or whatever with some of my bombs, I still have a better board and I'm going to be able to close out this game really quickly. I even get lucky and draw another creature. It was something that was a little more on the expensive side too. So feeling really good. Attack them. They draw their card for the turn, play a land or whatever, say go. I attack them again. Now I'm on the verge of victory once again. And they draw their card, think for a second, and then play Red Dragon. And I'm at 3 and it does 4 damage to me and the match is over. Now, that isn't that, I mean, those were dramatic games for sure. But the way that I think about losing out of a tournament that you actually care about, like I did for this one, or if you ever play in a GP or PT or whatever, or, PTQ, something like that, is it's kind of like if you break up with somebody, right? In that it is never just like, oh yeah, we just both decided that we would be better off and we just moved on. And somebody's always hurt. Somebody's always upset. Somebody always says, well, I can't believe that they didn't tell me this beforehand, or what about this other thing? And it's always messy. It always feels like something extra went on when really it's just how it works. Right. And it's the same thing with these type of tournaments, is that like I played one not close game and two really good close games. And my opponent, yes, they got lucky to draw the card that they needed, but they also put themselves in a position to win. And then they did. But it doesn't feel like that when you get busted out of a tournament. It feels like you were wronged or something. And generally, this is actually a real strength of mine, is that I'm able to process this type of stuff really quickly and pretty thoroughly. And I don't get super upset. If you've ever watched my stream or whatever, you'll see like, yeah, sometimes I go, what the heck? But I kind of move on to the next game, because this really is just sort of part of the deal. But I have to say, it really tilted me. I was like, oh, this sucks. Like I wanted to keep playing. I had a really good deck and I was out. That was it. No money, no chance at anything. And I was just out of the tournament. And I know that this is how they have to set it up to make the prize structure the way it is. But boy, it did suck to get up early, draft a sweet deck, and then play one match, feel a little bit like I got top decked or whatever out of two games. And then my day and my hopes were over. Pretty brutal. It is tough. Also, I think I'm just out of practice for playing on stuff like that I actually care about. And that made it a little bit harder too. So the reminder, I think the takeaway from something like this is that it is a skill, to be able, like I maybe took it for granted a little bit that I'd gotten very good. I would say my mental game is really, really strong when it comes to games and stuff like that. And I didn't feel that way after this. I wasn't like running around the house freaking out, but it was 3 hours later and I was just like, ugh, like I really wanted to win that. That sucks, and normally it would be 10 minutes and I would be like, well, that isn't the way I wanted it to go, but onward. And it didn't happen like that. I was like, come on. I wanted to keep playing. I wanted to, battle some more. So it is a muscle that you have to flex, and that you have to, kind of work. So always keep that in mind, that just, if you get to a certain point with your game, it doesn't mean that it'll stay that way. And I mean, again, I think still compared to most people, I was like, way, 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 way better. But I know how I feel normally inside and how I process it. And this was a little bit different than that. So kind of interesting. And then to cover Luis's side, he did stream it. So many of you may have watched it, but he had an awesome run with a couple of like just okay decks. Like my deck was way better than either of the ones that he had. And he scrapped together super close wins, kind of similar to the games that I played out, but his opponent just didn't find a burn spell or whatever. But he was at one like a lot and really up against it. But it was awesome. He was able to do Luis things and find himself a win. And he did make it all the way to the end and got the full amount. So congrats to Luis. I think that was awesome. It also showed that, it's not just about getting like, some lucky perfect deck or whatever. Like that was not part of the equation for Luis on the weekend. He drafted, his first deck was like blue-green with a little bit of black or something. Not exactly where he would choose to be, but he was able to find the wins. And also he's Luis, so it's like, that's what he does. But anyway, congrats to him. And that was my take on the arena stuff. I think I would keep it the way it is, but you do have to recognize going in, it is pretty brutal to have to wake up super early or super late, depending on where you're at, and then play draft right away, and then sort of fit in all the drafts and stuff like that. But I like it. I still think it works, and I'm looking forward to the next one. All right, let's get into these questions. I asked our patrons to ask a little bit of special questions, let's say, more about me or Luis, or me and Luis, rather than just straight up magic stuff. So let's see what they came up with. I'll do my best to answer these. This first one comes from Andre, who says, if you had to rate your happiness from 1 to 10, what number would you choose? And what do you think you'd have to do to get a higher number in the future? That's a really interesting one. what would I give myself? It's kind of interesting because a lot of times when I'm faced with questions like this, instead of looking inside and saying, oh, this is exactly how happy or not happy I feel at any given point, I kind of look at how happy I should feel, right? Like, you know, I lead a very privileged life, right? Compared to most people who have ever lived, right? Like I was born in the United States during the time frame that I was born, right? Even though I didn't grow up with like money and stuff like that, you know, we had like really not a lot for quite a stretch there. I still can pull myself out and say, yeah, but you still had a roof over your head. You still had food. You still enjoyed things as a kid. You know, it wasn't, you know, I've been to other countries and stuff where it's not necessarily the case. And it really does give you a strong sense of perspective on things like happiness and stuff. But I've also learned over time that humans adapt to their environment, and your happiness is usually not relative to the happiness of everybody else on the planet or other people who have lived over the course of human history or something like that had it much worse than you. It tends to be, I believe, sort of a combination of whatever your expectations are and then where you're at, you know, that kind of thing. But I would give myself a pretty good grade right now. Like not everything in my life is exactly how I'd want it, but a lot of things are. So I'd probably say like a 7 or an 8. And in order to get myself to that next level, I think, you know, kind of break things down into different ways, but like, you know, like career stuff, I'm a 10 out of 10. Like I love doing the podcast, and I've been doing the watch channel now, as we've mentioned before. And I've been able to put a lot of like creative energy and build into that. And I'm building something around that too. And so that's been really, really great. But, you know, I've had to make a big transition where when I was doing coverage every other weekend, I was gone all the time. And it kind of means that it's harder to develop the sort of close everyday relationships that you have at home normally with friends and family and loved ones and stuff like that. And so I've been, since before the pandemic actually, but the pandemic sort of accelerated it. But even before then, I had started to prioritize rebuilding those type of things. And that's the thing that I want to keep doing. I've really got a lot of reward from that. I think like I felt a lot better. And I won't be doing the travel thing again like that. That stage of my life is over. I am still going to be traveling some for some of the events that we're covering, but coverage is just a totally different beast now than it ever was. It's just fewer opportunities. I mean, I'm doing 4 things next year, right? Like that's if I'm lucky. So, you know, it has been a shift in that way, but it's led to some other stuff. So I think if I were to try to get to the higher number, it would be to continue to develop the relationships that I have here at home. And keep doing that. Andy says, Marshall, I know you're a basketball guy, but are you going to watch, follow, be a fan of the Seattle Kraken? Having an NHL team in your backyard now has to be better than an NBA team, right? As always, love the show and keep up the good work. Andy, you troll. So of course it's not better than having an NBA team, but I have gone to one Kraken game. For those who don't know, there was an expansion for the NHL, the National Hockey League, and Seattle now has a team, and they're called the Seattle Kraken, and they've done a really great job. The stadium that they play in is called the Climate Pledge Arena. It's basically owned by Amazon or backed by Amazon, and it's beautiful, fully redone thing. And the Kraken like logo and branding and all that stuff has been really great. I mean, you know, I live not that far from where the Kraken play. And if it's a Kraken game, I mean, I can't, if I go outside, it's just people in Kraken gear all over the place. So that part's been really incredible for them. I am not a hockey fan. I just don't really get it. It's just like, I've never played, right? Like I don't even know how to ice skate. I mean, I've done it a couple of times, like as a kid or whatever, but it's just so foreign to me. Like I live in Seattle. It doesn't get that cold here, right? Like even the winters here are just kind of gray and rainy, and yeah, it'll freeze and it'll snow every couple of years for a few days. But I mean, I don't know. This just wasn't part of my life growing up ever. We didn't have a professional hockey team here when I was growing up. This is recent. We had professional, but not an NHL team. So go Kraken, I guess. I'm definitely not that into it. My friend Zame took me to a game, and that was really cool because he's a huge hockey fan. He's from Colorado, so, it's like a much more of a thing there. And furthermore, he understands the game on a much, much deeper level than I do, or than I really ever will. But that meant I could ask him questions, right? When we were watching the game, I just kept on asking him questions about stuff and sort of translating it into basketball. And that actually did make it a lot more interesting for me. So I think, probably best case for me is that I go to a couple of Kraken games a year, and that's probably where it goes for me. I don't think I'm going to, be a hardcore follower of the team. I'm still hoping and praying that we bring back the Sonics, my basketball team. Next question comes from Rob, who says, "Hey Marshall, what's the coolest experience that you and Luis have ever shared as friends?" Wow, that's a good one. We've had some really great experiences. Some of the things that come to mind are we went on the Magic Cruise together, and this is when we were still kind of getting to know each other. I'd met him in real life for a stretch when we did the Community Cup, which was also on the list of great experiences that we had together. Though that was the first time I met him, so we were still kind of getting to know each other. But we hit it off pretty quick. We got along really well right away. But the Magic Cruise was great. We just cube drafted and ate food the whole time. I mean, it's hard to beat that. And really, I really did feel like I really got to know him a lot better during that too. We hung out most of the time, and it was really cool. Just because we got along so well. So that was neat. Me getting to announce him in the finals of a PT, that wasn't an experience together per se, but like it is something really great, when you get to see somebody that you care about have such great success. It was really fun to get a chance to do that. Or, another one is for a long stretch there at the Pro Tour, they would have me announce the top 8. So I'd go out in front of this crowd of people and by myself with just a microphone and a camera in front of me. And I would say, "Magic fans from around the world, it's time for a top 8 announcement." And I get to announce his name because he top 8'd quite a few that I covered. And that was really cool too, standing up on stage with him as he, got another big accomplishment. I wouldn't say the coolest experience, but I think the other type that really does stand out are the times when we've been there for each other. Luis and I it's not just podcast or Magic buddies for him and I. Like, we've gone through stuff, during our friendship time together, and, real life, personal stuff, relationship stuff like that, where we really kind of needed each other. I get, however the timing worked out, the other person was there for the other, like I was there for him. He was there for me during tough times. And those are not the coolest experiences, but they are ones that stand out for sure. That's kind of, I think, a lot of times where you find out who are your friends, who are kind of, your buddies, and they care about you, but they're going to kind of like, yeah, he's got some stuff going on, and leave you alone, or the type of person that's going to say, "Hey, I'm going to step it up and help you out." And I don't think that there's anything wrong with either types of those friendships, but, Luis and I have been through enough together to do that for each other. And then I think the last one that comes to mind, and this might be the coolest, is, there was that stretch where he took about a year off to do coverage, and him and I got to cover the PT together. And that meant that, we were talking about coverage all the time. We were in the booth together. We were doing all that stuff. So that was a really cool experience to get to do that with one of your best friends. Justin says, the classic job interview question: where do you see yourself in 5 years? What about 10? I am hoping. So the way I see, like, career-wise, particularly, there's a couple of things that I see in the, like, let's call it the 5-year horizon. And one of them is this watch stuff for me, right? Because this YouTube channel's really taken off, and it's become a thing that I, give a lot of attention and time to. And that's coincided with a time when things have shifted pretty significantly for Magic. And that's happened on 2 fronts mostly. One of them has been sort of the broader competitive Magic scene. The last few years, obviously it took a big dip. It's kind of on the comeback now, but we're still feeling out where it's going to land and how I'm going to fit into that. Also with the advent of, different types of products like Commander and Secret Layers and stuff like that, Wizards of the Coast has certainly shifted their focus away from competitive, not entirely, right? I don't mean that they don't care about it, but there are other fruitful places for them to put their marketing and their, the Eye of Sauron, as it were. And they're experimenting with that. I had a big, if you've been to one of these command fests, you know what I'm talking about. Like it doesn't feel like a GP. It has similar vibes. It's a really cool, these things are freaking awesome, but they're not there to cater to the type of crowd that I identify most with, which is the hyper competitive, professional level crowd. Those are my people. Those are the people that I really get along with and sort of sync with. And that's also the thing that I find the most fascinating about Magic. I'm not a casual player. I don't really enjoy that aspect of the game that much. I enjoy the ability to try to prove yourself and to try to improve yourself and get better and to work at something that has a very high ceiling. That's what I really like. And so that shift, in conjunction with the coverage duties basically disappearing, has meant I need to sort of recalibrate how I fit into the Magic space. And currently the way I see it is I still would really enjoy being in the booth for the very high level, for the Pro Tours basically, and the World Championship, because I still think that that's important. And I still view my role there as being kind of like a intermediary between people who like Magic, but aren't really that into the super competitive stuff, and to the super competitive stuff and the stuff that I find interesting in it. So I still would like to maintain that. And then the other thing that I want to maintain is this, right? I love doing this podcast and I still love Limited and I love drafting and I love helping people improve and actually get better, because when you see that happen, if you help somebody and they go, I am starting to win, like this is actually working for me. I'm listening, I'm trying stuff out, I'm applying it, and it's actually working. That is extremely rewarding. That's really the basis of our show. That's what we want out of the show, is to help people get better and win. And so I'd like to keep doing that as well. So that's kind of how I see it. Is I want to continue to grow and focus on the watch channel and the things that I have kind of orbiting around that. And then I want to recalibrate how I interact and how I fit into Magic, the community, and the stuff for work. So hopefully I'm still doing those things in 5 years, and hopefully the channel, the watch channel has grown and continues to be a focus for me too. Ryan says, Guten Abend, Marshall. I've managed to miss if you've previously told the story of how you learned German. Can you tell it again? My family was posted in West Germany in the 80s, so I learned a bunch, but have lost most of it. Yeah. I learned it from, basically I was in high school and I had a friend who was an exchange student named Nico. And him and I were very similar people. We're both tall. We both love basketball. We love the same type of music and stuff. And so I really became good friends with him. And he invited me to come visit him in Germany after we graduated from high school. And I had never traveled internationally, but I was like, yeah, I want to go visit Nick. So I got a ticket and I had no idea what I was doing. I was 18 or 19 or whatever. And I got on a plane and I went over and I visited him. And this is the first time as an American and as a young American being in a country that didn't speak English. Now, Germans are actually pretty good at it. Now they're really good at it. But at the time, it wasn't quite as common. But I felt, it's too strong of a word, but I felt a little bit ashamed. Just a little like, oh my God, I am that guy. I am the dumb American that doesn't speak any other language, that kind of expects everybody to speak his language. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because I had only ever known life here. And it just was a big wake up call for me to go, hey, there's other stuff out there, dude. Like it's not just about the US. It's not just about you and about people accommodating you. Right. And so when I got home, I said, I'm going to learn to speak German. Like I'm going to take on a language, because I had also read that learning a language helps you understand another culture and also can be good for your brain. Like it sort of creates different tracks in your brain that can be really good about learning and understanding and stuff. And so I started taking it at community college, which I was going to at the time. And for the next some number of years, I ended up going back and visiting Nick about on average once a year and hanging out with him there. And so when I was there, I had been taking the classes, but if you've ever taken any German or any language classes here in the States, it's probably like this other place too. But I mean, they don't teach you how to speak the language. It's just that simple. Like, you know, if you took German in high school right now, you're probably going like Guten Tag. And then you kind of look at the person like, did I say that right? You know, but you can't speak or understand in a way that people actually speak a language, right? Where you can be understood and where you can get the words out in a way that's like fast enough and reliable enough to actually be able to hold a conversation. And furthermore, being able to listen to the way that people actually speak languages, right? Like a really good example is if you go somewhere else and you learn English, you know, they might teach you something like, hello, how do you do? Or hello, how are you doing? Right? And that is just not how people talk. They just don't speak that way, right? People they speak much, much faster, and they use slang and they use colloquial words that are sort of accepted substitutes for those things. Like here in the States, we might say, how are you? Right? But that sounds normal if you're an English speaker, but that is not the same thing as how are you? It's how are you? It's like, it's just sort of one smashed together word where, you know, there was no discernible spaces there, right? How are you? How are you? It's just like, bleh. And you isn't ya. And so that's confusing when you come over. But then when you go, oh, that's how they say it, they just smash all those words together so it's easier to get out of your mouth. And that's how you have to learn other languages too, if you want to actually be able to speak it. And so what I was lucky enough, there was two things I was very lucky with. One of them was that it turns out that language is one of my strong suits. It's something that I'm naturally good at. I noticed it right away when I was in the class that when I spoke, I could actually make it sound like my teacher did, and other people really struggled. And that my brain was able to process and to piece together what somebody was saying in another language, even if I didn't know all the words. I could contextualize enough of it to go, I think this is what you asked. And they'd be like, that is exactly what I asked. And I couldn't necessarily say, here's each word that you said, but I'm like, I get it. I can fill in gaps fast enough and on the fly to be able to say, and have enough confidence to go, okay, yeah, that's got to be what they're asking. And then go with it. So that was lucky because I didn't know that. But then also I got to go back over and hang out with Nick and then his group of friends, which became my group of friends. And what that meant was that and this was hard, but I had to tell them, no, I need you to speak German to me, because when they came to me, if they would say something in German and I wouldn't understand, they would just switch over to English to try to accommodate me, which was really nice of them. And also they love to show off and try to use their English just like I was trying to use my German. But I really had to tell them, you know, guys, I really have to like go through the crucible here and have you say some stuff that maybe I don't understand so that I can start to pick up the language. And so over the course of a number of trips over there, that's what happened. And that's how I ended up learning. And now I haven't used it in a long time, so it's still there somewhere. I was listening to something that was in German the other day, and I was like, yeah, I can still understand most of this. And, you know, but it would take me a little while to knock off the rust. I have actually been asked to go on a podcast that speaks German, but I'm kind of nervous about it just because it's been a while. Okay, Andrew says, what's your favorite Tool song? What would Luis's favorite Tool song be? Oh, that's good. And if he were a fan, would Luis's Lateralis listening order be album order, spiral order, or shuffle like a monster? This is a great question from Andrew, who's obviously also a Tool fan. Tool's, if I had to pick one musical act to be my favorite, it would be Tool. They are amazing, really great. progressive rock, right? The kind of experimental stuff, super long songs, weird stuff, offbeat, the whole thing. But it's the kind of thing that if you give it 3 or 4 listens and you start to go, okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. And next thing you know, you're synced up with it. And then they just kind of take you on a ride. And it's really, really great. My favorite Tool song is Lateralis from their album Lateralis. There are many that I like, of course, but that's the song that, I don't have a tattoo of a song lyric, but if I were, those are the ones that I think of, push the envelope, watch it bend, stuff like that. Luis's favorite Tool song, I don't know, but I'm going to say Ticks and Leeches because that fits his personality. And if he were a fan, would he listen to Lateralis in album order, spiral order, or shuffle like a monster? So what Andrew's talking about here is Lateralis, that album that I mentioned that I really like. There's an order to the songs, but also there's this concept that sort of permeates through the album of spiraling out and this Fibonacci sequence type of thing. And so you can listen to it in a different order that some people say is better, whatever. And then, or you could just put it on shuffle. It's strange, but I don't think it would matter to Luis. I don't think he would care. I think he might actually shuffle. Like, I know that sounds weird, but I think that like his brain would just take the songs at face value. I think. I'm not 100% sure about that. Next question comes from Etapong, who says, hello, Marshall and Luis. What are the qualities you most appreciate in each other? Oh, that's a good one. Speaking for me, qualities I appreciate in Luis, fairness. I think Luis is generally guided by kind of a strong moral compass, self-awareness. I really, Luis has experienced a lot of success in his life, but he also recognizes that, he's a work in progress. And I really appreciate that. I also, I think one underrated thing too, that I think Luis is really good at that some people aren't, is self-honesty in both directions. So I think a lot of times people think when you think of being self-honest, you think you're honest with yourself about what you're not good at. And he is. But he is also honest about what he is good at. And he will tell you, I think I'm good at this. I think that this is a strength of mine. And when he says that, he's right. And I think that's really important to notice too. Like, you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think he's really in tune to that. And I like that about him. I don't know what he would say, the qualities that he most appreciates about me. Probably like integrity. I think he respects that about me, that like I care about that kind of stuff and, I'm willing to act on it and such. But I don't know. We'd have to ask him that one. Jonathan says, hi, Marshall. How do you think your life has turned out so far? Wow. Another way to ask the question, what's one thing you're most grateful for in your life? And what's one thing you're working on or disappointed about? I admire your ability and willingness to accept change and to pursue passions, poker, podcasting, watchmaking. But I imagine that pivoting so much in life has caused you to reflect on your journey. If so, I'm curious about what you think about that journey. Yeah, Jonathan, man, great question. And you're completely right about that. I have had to think about that a lot. I think on paper, my life has turned out way better than would have been expected. When I grew up, I grew up in a loving household. My parents loved me. They did get a divorce when I was 10. So I saw my dad every once in a while, from when I was like 10 to, age 20 or whatever. And then I kind of forced a reconciliation with him. And then we ended up being very close until he passed away. So I was really glad that I did that. But when I was a kid, it was just like every other weekend type thing. He was around, but not that much. And so it was more about my mom. And my mom then had to go to work to support us. And we were not doing well for a long time financially. She ended up getting remarried and things kind of settled again. But there was a good 6-7 year stretch there where we were not great. And she was doing everything she could to just sort of keep us afloat. And my mom is more the type of person that always told me, she said, like, I want you to grow up to be a good person. I don't really care what you do for work or if you make money or are successful or whatever. She's like, that's up to you. But, I want you to be a good person. So I kind of always thought, okay, well, that seems like a good bar. But that also meant that I wasn't really pushed. When I was younger, I wasn't really, there was no expectations. I don't know how it is for you, at home. And if your parents were like, well, you're going to be a doctor, or your parents were like, well, you're going to go to college, or your parents like, you're going to get good grades, or you're going to play sports, or you have to hit these certain bars. But mine didn't. They put no expectation at all. And I think that was a bit of a disservice in some ways, but also a service in others. So what it meant was I didn't try that hard in school. And I finished community college. So I got a 2-year degree from community college, but then I couldn't afford to go to a 4-year school. Like I worked at the grocery store. I was like, I don't have any money for this. So I didn't go. And I kind of was like, well, I'm going to go at some point, but I couldn't afford it. So I just worked at the grocery store for a while. And, my mom, that was fine. Like they thought that was just fine. And, I look back and I'm like, that really wasn't. Like, it wasn't that it was such a bad job or something, but it was like, I worked there for 6 years, right? And that, from when I was 18 to when I was 24, 25 or something like that. And, I look at how my life is now and how I approach things. And there was a transition. So I was in that scenario where I was like working basically retail hourly. And then I got very lucky that a friend of mine noticed that there was a job opening where he worked at AT&T. And he got me an interview. He said, look, I can't get you the job necessarily, but I can get you an interview. I told him that you're good at this type of stuff that we would be doing, that you understand computers, that you can learn this stuff, but that you don't have experience. You'd be coming in at entry level. And I said, okay. And I, figured out how to tie a tie and went in for this interview. And they liked me and they said, okay, we're going to give you a shot. And I said, all right, I'm not letting go of this dang thing, right? So I read books and I did it. And I worked there for about 7 years. And then I made much better money and it was a much better job. It was like an air quotes real job. But I was like going into that thinking that I wasn't going to be good at it because I hadn't finished school and everybody else had. And I realized when I got there, I'm like, I'm actually way more capable. I picked this up actually pretty fast and I'm pretty good at it. Like within a year, I would have put myself up against anybody on the team as far as how well I understood the stuff and where I was at with it. And after a couple of years, I kind of thought like, I'm kind of the best one at this, and this wasn't hard stuff. This was testing a website. I was doing QA, quality assurance on the website. So it wasn't like genius stuff, but I was just like, I picked this up and I actually got pretty good at it. Interesting. And then, eventually I just got so miserable, being in the cubicle and just not really being able to do any creative type stuff that I finally quit to do the podcast and that stuff. But then it was the same thing, it was like started the podcast and there was no podcast, right? And then me and Ryan willed it into existence, and I felt like within a year we had like one of the best magic podcasts going, maybe 6 months. I just thought I'm really proud of the quality of this show. And I listened to the other shows that were out at the time and they were fine, but I was like, I think ours is like right near the top. And, that was something that was a lot of me in that and Ryan as well. And I was like, maybe I'm just good at this stuff. Like maybe I should have a bit more confidence about starting something like this, And the biggest step for me was the most recent one, at least, was starting the Watch channel, because that was once again, me pushing out into the void, right? There was no Watch channel and then I'm going to make a Watch channel. So I have to decide everything about it. I have to decide who I want to talk to, how I want to talk to them, how I want to frame this stuff, how I want to do all the technical parts. I'm at 3 cameras now, all filming this little thing. And also I have to learn how to be a watchmaker. That's a hard skill. People go to school for that. It requires patience. And your mental game has to be very strong for watchmaking. It also requires dexterity and sort of mechanical understanding. And so I'm doing these 2 really hard things at once. And then, there's a small community of watch repair people on YouTube. And I kind of had a similar feeling where I'm like, there's some good stuff here, but like, I think I might be able to put my mark on it. And I had some ideas and they weren't the normal stuff, right? It wasn't a 11-minute YouTube video or whatever. It was, I want to tell a story about this watch and how I restored it. And I want to show all the steps. So that's going to take more time. Videos ended up being about 45 minutes. Most people at the time would tell you that to make a 45-minute video on YouTube was crazy talk. But I'm like, I know what I want to do. Right. And then you fast forward like a year and a half and the channel starts to really blow up and it's doing its thing now. And I'm like, right. And I always think back to, I think I was more capable than I knew. Now I feel like I kind of have a bit more confidence about it, a bit more understanding of like what my skill set is, the good stuff about it, and also my weaknesses. And I think about the world in a completely different way. And so to go back to the question about how my life has turned out so far, I feel really fortunate that I found these tracks to get on, because I think that I had a lot more potential than working at the grocery store, but I had never been told that. I had to really figure that out for myself and develop that confidence and that skill set and stuff on my own. And I think the thing that I feel luckiest about, and I think the thing that I would tell a lot of people who are in their, say, late 20s or whatever, and they still haven't really figured out what they want to do. I mean, when I quit AT&T, I was like 33 or 34 or something like that. And that's when I started doing magic stuff full time. And now I'm doing magic and the watch stuff. But when I started the watch channel, I mean, I'm 44 now. That was 2.5 years ago. I was 41 or 42, right? Like, and these were like brand new things to me. I feel lucky that I found my route through, because it did take me longer. Everything always takes me longer, to be honest. But it did take me longer to find that than my best friend Jay, he went to college, 4-year college. He got out and he started working, and he's been working ever since, in the same field in communications. And it's like, he knew what he wanted to do and he's doing it, right? And for me, it wasn't like that. I'm sort of all over the map. The other thing that I would say about the pivoting and stuff, Jonathan, is I do view the world in a different way as far as that goes, because I am much more willing now to take on risk if there's a higher upside. I put, say, a year and a half of really hard work into the watch channel, and it was growing, and I was starting to even get some money from it and stuff like that. So it was okay before it really started to blow up like at the end of last year. And now it's been on kind of one of these crazy runs where it's really found like an audience, a core of people that want to watch this stuff. And, but I mean, that's working for a year and a half for really not getting anything back. And that's something that I'm much more willing to do now if I see that there's potential. Because the way that I see it is that when I worked hourly rate, let's say at the grocery store, it's the worst of both worlds. I was capped monetarily and I was capped with moving up realistically. Like I could have tried to go into management at the store, but that's really crappy if you don't want to really become like a lifer. And then when I got to AT&T, the ceiling was higher because it was more like a corporate job, but the incentives weren't lined up. If I absolutely busted my butt for, let's say, 2 quarters in a row, so 6 months, and I really went hard at it, I would get the same pay as if I kind of loafed and, spent a little too much time on, poker forums and Amazon.com or whatever while I was at work. And for people like me, it's not for everybody, but for people like me, if you take the ceiling off of it and go, however much you put in is how much you can get out. You think more about your channel, you put more editing time in, you put more shooting time, you track down better projects, you are going to get more of everything, more growing the channel, more money at the end of the day, that type of stuff. That is the environment in which I prefer to be. I like taking the ceiling off. And I think that each person should really kind of evaluate their mentality and skill set. And if you are that type of person, you should take the ceiling off. You should. 100%. Like, you should definitely remove any restrictions on what can happen on the upper end if you're the type of person that can work really hard, doesn't mind the risk, doesn't mind putting in the year, 2-3 years, or whatever it takes to get the thing going. Then you should take it off. I know that's not for everybody. A lot of people, that's very, very, very stressful. And it is for me to a point, but I can handle that. Some people are like, look, I cannot, like, if it's every day, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and I have no runway or whatever, then don't, then that's, I think, a personal choice. But if you are the type of person that can do that, I think you should. Thanks for the question, Jonathan. Mike B says, if Wizards approach both of you to schedule your own month of throwback drafts on Arena or Magic Online, 1 set per week for 4 weeks, meaning 4 total, what would be the ideal lineup? Assume since you have either client, you can do any cube that has been released, but you can only choose 1 draft format per week. So no vintage cube for 4 straight weeks. I think for me, I mean, it would be a lineup of my favorite sets, but it's because I would want to appease people who like the things that I like, which I think is a lot of people. So for me, Vintage Cube would 100% be on one of those weeks. I think Cons of Tarkir would be on one of those weeks. I think I would go for one more recent set just to try to capture people that aren't like super old school. And I think I would do Strixhaven. I really like that one, and I think that would be cool. And then I'm tempted to do Innistrad, but I don't like Innistrad as a flashback draft format because people just try to draft the spider spawning deck and it ends up being kind of degenerate. So I probably wouldn't do that. And I think I would go with Rise of the Eldrazi. Super fun, super slow, by modern standards. And I think people would really dig that. So that'd be my lineup. I'm not sure what order I would do it in. Probably say Vintage Cube for last. Corey says, this question is for Luis, which I'm going to answer. What are you truly more hungry for? A proper California burrito or getting your likeness on an MTG card? Does it vary on the day and quality of the current limited format? Side challenge, Marshall, design you two as a build around uncommons from your favorite MTG planes. Okay, that's too hard. Have fun with this rambling question. Well, I'm definitely going to tackle the first one, Corey. The second one I think is, I really suck at designing cards. I need Luis for that. But is Luis more hungry for a proper California burrito or getting his likeness on an MTG card? So as much as a burrito would appeal to him, and he is from California and he'd love to revisit that, he really wants his likeness on an MTG card. He's not really the type to just like talk about that kind of stuff all the time, but that hits Luis. I mean, it hits many people, but that, like, he would rather have that than a lot of money. Like, if you gave him a prize pool of, like, I don't know exactly what his line would be, but let's say it was $250,000 prize pool, or he could have that, he would definitely think about it. Like, not, what I mean is, if he could win his first prize, like, let's say it was Worlds, and he could win 100,000 or get his likeness on a card, I guarantee he would take the likeness. If it was 150, I still think he would. If it was 200, I think he would start really thinking about it. 250, I think might be his line. I don't know. But I mean, just the fact that he would give up $100,000 in prize money to have his own Magic card kind of, I think, says it all. Because there's a lot of people that would be like, that would be really cool, but please give me that money, right? But I know that's not the case for Luis. Okay, a few more questions. Let me grab a drink real quick here. I got an Arnold Palmer just for this because I knew I was going to be talking a lot. And also I like them every day. Jogger says, hi, Marshall. First, thank you for your work, the show, your commentary, and also for the watch channel. I've never been into watches, and I find the videos fascinating. That's great, Jogger. Thanks for saying that. I also want to thank you for being a full human being on this show in particular. I've recently taken a few lumps between some health issues as I've gotten older and some challenges at work. When you find yourself slipping into negative space, who do you lean on the most, or who steps in to support you, whether asked or not? To put it another way, who are you grateful to have in your life? How do you think Luis would answer this? Yeah, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, and I can say that Luis is absolutely one of those people. He is there for you. Like if you need help, Luis will help, and he will recognize when you're not doing that well and ask as well. So I'm really grateful for that. He's done that for me, in the past as well. And it's really great to have somebody to take me out. And then, I have friends and close people here that are really important to me. My family, not as much. It's not that they're like distant. It's just, I don't have like a huge extended family, and they would definitely be there for me if I asked, but it's not like, I'm just not really day-to-day part of my life. So I don't think they would really know if I was in like a really negative space, for sure. How would Luis answer the question? I think he would lean on me. I think he would lean on Gabby. Paul, our friend Paul Chion, he's definitely there for you if you need him, and you can ask him for stuff, and he'll go into battle mode for you as well. Luis's family is also great. He's got two really great brothers, and both his mom and his dad are also a big part of his life too. So I think that he's got a really good support network there too. Jake says, "Hey Marshall, I just had my first child, a daughter named Lily. Congratulations, Jake. That is fantastic. Welcome, Lily. The truth is I really want her to like magic. I'm afraid I'll push it too hard though. So I was wondering first, what strategy would you use for exposing your kid to magic? Not necessarily teaching them the rules as much as love for it. I'd also be curious to hear what Luis might have to say on the topic." Yeah. I mean, of course, Luis would be a much better person to answer this because he does have a child, and in fact, a daughter and a son now too, but he has a daughter as well. And so he would probably actually know the answer, but I will tell you the way that if I have a kid, the way that I would approach it, which is I think that if you try to force your hobbies on your kid and they're not really feeling it, or it's just not really their thing, I think you really can turn them off to it. And what I found when I was growing up is I was into the stuff my dad was into, but it was because he didn't force it on me, and he made me, I wanted to know what he was up to. I wanted to be a part of what he was doing. And so what I would do is say, basically, I would leave the door open at all times, and I would have a very strong vibe of, I'm just going to leave this here, right? Here's your deck. I made this for you. You can play it if you want, but you don't have to, right? You can do whatever you want with it. And I'm going to leave it on the table, and I'm not really going to be involved with it. And if you come to me and say, hey, I want to try playing, I'll teach you. But if you don't, that's okay too, because I just don't think that you can force stuff like that. And I think that children will naturally be somewhat interested in what you're doing, especially if it's something that looks like fun, like a game or whatever. And then your job is to keep that door as open as possible. And I really do like that. I'm going to leave this here for you because I think it's much more effective if somebody can discover something a little bit more on their own. Congratulations, Jake. That's awesome news. Ben says, "Hey, Marshall, I love the interview episodes both you and Luis have done for each other. Is there anyone else you would like to do for this when a normal episodes or a format slows down? Maybe Gabby or BK?" Yeah, I mean, that would be great. LR co-hosts, Ryan. I would love to have that kind of talk with Ryan, and he's such an insightful, intelligent person. You can learn a lot from him. I've learned a lot from him over the years. Ryan Spain, of course, I'm talking about who I started the show with. He would probably be my number one to do something like that, because those type of interview shows do get kind of personal. And so it'd be a little bit weird to have somebody who I didn't really know, like say a Magic Pro or something like that. So yeah, people that are in our more immediate orbit, like Gabby, BK, Ryan and stuff would be who I'd go to. Nikolai Bolus. Hey, Nikolai, says, this question is for Marshall. I was wondering where you developed such amazing cinematographer skills for your watchmaking channel. I know you've been making draft videos and things like that for years, but the amazing zooms and cuts are pretty much movie-like experience. And pretty much movie-like experience you create for your watch channel blows me away every time. It feels significantly different from an MTG video. So I'm curious where and how you develop those skills. Thanks for all you do. Thank you, Nikolai. That means a lot. As a fellow YouTuber, if you guys don't know, Nikolai Bolas is also a Magic YouTuber, so actually knows of what he speaks. Like maybe 5 years ago or between 5 and 6 years ago, I decided that I needed to learn how to do video. And I had no idea how. But I knew that there was going to be some things that I wanted to work on in Magic. Primarily, I wanted to start MTG Breakdown, which was the YouTube channel that I did. It still exists, but I don't add stuff to it anymore. For a few years, it was kind of like a kind of get my feet wet, experimental, fun side project type thing. But I knew I didn't know how to make videos. So what I did is, in order to learn how to be just in an editor, a video editor, I took some online classes from a site called lynda.com, which has now been merged with one of the other big training sites. I can't remember which one now. But it was really great. You can kind of pick your instructor, and I got really lucky. And there's a lady there named Ashley Kennedy, and she was just a fantastic teacher for, I use Adobe Premiere primarily to do my video editing. And I took her class, which was long. I mean, I think it was 18 hours of stuff or something. It's like a quarter of college, like a college quarter or something. It was a lot. And I don't normally do that. Normally I just sort of teach myself, but I just knew that this was complicated enough that it would be worth it for me to actually take the time to learn it for real. So that, and then doing the MTG Breakdown channel and the 2 types of videos that I primarily did on there did help me understand how to technically edit. But that isn't really the thing that Nikolai's talking about. That's the thing that Nikolai's talking about is more like artistic, I guess, right? It's more of like what's your vision? How do you bring that to your video? And what I ended up doing for that was leaning on my experience as a photographer, because I have loved photography for a really long time, like since I was like 17 or 18. And even when I was a kid, I loved it. And so I've spent a lot of time reading and learning and taking photos. And what I realized pretty quickly was that video is a lot like photo in the way that you compose, the way that you technically try to get the most out of your camera. And so one of the reasons that I'm able to do the watch channel is the cameras that we use now to film video are the same ones that we use to shoot stills, where before, you would have to use a dedicated video camera, which has a much different set of everything, including lenses, which is really the important part. Now, though, the cameras that I shoot with stills are the ones that I shoot video on as well. And I get to use the lenses that I've accumulated over the years as well to get the shots. And so if you see the aesthetic of like the watch channel, that is the aesthetic of my photography. That's the vibe that I like to shoot photographs in. And I've done my best job to translate it and to morph it into how can I show the things that I think are really important to show to the audience. And I've settled on a 3-camera setup. I have an overhead camera with a macro lens that lets you get really close. And then I have a wide shot, if you will, that shows kind of my work area. And then I have a very close macro lens off to the side. And that lets me open up the little world that I'm working in here in a way that makes me really happy. I did 2 cameras for, a good year and a half of the show. But after it started getting some traction and I got a little bit of money out of it, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to reinvest this back in. And I'm going to buy another camera and a lens and a tripod and stuff. And I'm going to have this side shot that I've really wanted the whole time to get up to 3 shots. Occasionally I go to 4. I actually use my iPhone for that 4th shot because you can get such good video out of it now, but that's an aside. Anyway, and so that's where I got that from, Nikolai. It's from photography. It's translating my photographic viewpoints into video form. That's a good way to put it. Thanks for the question and for the nice words too, Nikolai. Jeremy says, "Hey Marshall, this Q&A episode is such a sweet idea. Thank you. What do you think? What do you look for in a broadcast partner? Who are some of your favorite announcers outside of Magic? I personally enjoy Al Michaels, Chris Collinsworth, Joe Buck, Vern Lundquist, Kirk Herbstreit, and Rick Jenneret, who are the Buffalo Sabres play-by-play guy for 51 years. Wow. Thank you guys for all your hard work. I really appreciate you and Elsfie and this podcast community. Thank you, Jeremy. Things I look for in a broadcast partner, your first question. It's kind of funny because you would think that it would be really important to have knowledge about magic, passion for the subject, background that gives credibility, and those are all very important. But I have had people on the show as a potential co-host back in the day that had all of those things, but they were missing an incredibly key element, which is, to put it into one word, chemistry. Luis and I got along the first time we ever met. Right away, I got his humor, he got mine, we understood each other, and it's been like that ever since. And here's the key. We record this podcast, and we've always recorded this podcast remotely, right? Luis lives in Denver. I live here in Seattle. But even when we first started, when Ryan and I first started, we both lived in Seattle, but we didn't get together because we knew that that would create a potential boundary for us to not do the show. So we decided to do it remotely. But what that means is you need to vibe with the other person, right? You got to have it where that person knows when I'm finishing a sentence and prompting them to talk. And there's not this long silence of them going, oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted me to talk. And then you can't have that, right? The show's got to be conversational. And so he has to know, that I'm passing the baton over to him. So that to me is, you have to have that. It doesn't really matter what your resume is. You have to have that. So that's what I look for in a broadcast partner, because we're remote. Some of my favorite announcers outside of Magic, Mike Breen, who's kind of the number one NBA guy, is definitely like sort of the rock solid professional that I really look up to. But my all-time favorite is Kevin Calabro. He was a play-by-play announcer for the Sonics, the basketball team that was here. But they left in 2008 or were stolen from us, depending on how you view it. And in my mind, he's the best NBA basketball announcer. NBA TV hired him. They recognized how good he was and had him do a ton of games for them. He also did work afterwards for the Portland Trailblazers and still does. And he is unbelievable. He's able to bring a level of excitement. And there's this fine line when you're a play-by-play commentator between getting too cute. Think about some of the Magic play-by-play commentators that you know. Some of them get too cute. They do, right? They try too hard to be clever. They try too hard to be funny. They try to push those boundaries to make themselves entertaining or make themselves the focus of the discussion. And that doesn't work for me. That I think stands out, and I find that not very appealing. There's many basketball announcers that do this too. Kevin Calabro is able to walk that fine line between having credibility and bringing the broadcast to you, the viewer, the listener, but also sprinkling in some really funny or fun little things. Like, there was a couple of times when a guy would go up for like a big dunk and he would say, and he would freak out and he would say something like, "Get on that magic carpet and ride." Right. And it's like, that's cool. Like, it's like, all right, you can kind of picture the basketball player just flying through the air, that kind of thing. So he's my GOAT. It is kind of funny. I think it's national chain. It's based in Seattle. It's called Nordstrom. It's like a department store. And I was there and I saw Kevin Calabro. I walked by and I was just like, oh man, the GOAT. Todd Johnson says, "Hey Marshall, what's Luis's biggest leak as a drafter?" Man, he really tightened up his game. This was about 8 years ago. This was an easy answer. He would be too willing to splash and draft too many expensive cards, but he's really tightened up his game. At this point, he is not one to fall for the trap of splashing too much. He really understands and is willing to prioritize both curve and his mana. Luis is world class. He really is. Like, he's one of the best drafters out there. The only thing that comes to mind is some sort of discipline, but like, honestly, he's shored that up. So yeah, I give him high marks across the board, as a drafter. My friend Matt says, "Hey Marshall, how has your development as a Magic player influenced your watch repair craftsmanship?" Excellent question, Matt. It is, it's funny. It is, influenced it greatly. Patience. I was talking about tilt at the beginning and how I said that I think that one of my strongest points is my mental game. Like to the point that like, even if I was just sort of upset a little while after on this last weekend about this thing, that I'm like, maybe I'm slipping. I mean, most people would be like that on a good day, plus of course we all know people who've, smashed a mouse or a keyboard and all that stuff. And I'm miles from that. And this is translated beautifully because you absolutely have to be very, very patient if you're going to work on watches. It is hard. It is unforgiving. It is tiny work. You can make mistakes that are very punishing, breaking apart or losing it. And it just is devastating. And I am able to focus and keep my attention on this thing for a long time. And if I do screw up, I take a deep breath and I carry on. And that's been really important. I think I probably would have given up if I didn't have that. Thanks for the question, Matt. Hope to see you soon. A couple more questions. This comes from our friend A.E. Funk. If Luis had never heard of magic and became a chef instead, what would be his restaurant be called? And what would be the signature dish? This is good. The signature dish really, I don't know what his restaurant would be called. I feel like he would probably do approachable fusion, like something that, you could feel comfortable just walking in and grabbing. That doesn't have to be some huge experience, but he'd really want to execute on it well. And I think that he would want to tap into his kind of like Latin roots, right? Like his dad's from South America. He grew up in California where there's a heavy influence from Mexico primarily. And he loves those types of foods for sure. He's well known for his love of burritos, and that would be the easy answer. But I think if he was a chef, he would actually take it to a different level than just like really good burritos. I think, he loves Asian food too. And maybe he could come up with some type of mix along those lines, or, a twist on something like that. I don't know what the name of his restaurant would be, but I do think it would be Spanish or have a Spanish influence. Last question comes from Kyle, who says, Marshall and Luis, thanks for all the great content each week. You're welcome, Kyle. I've got a genius or grifter for you. Ooh, good ending. My opponent is on 9 life with Dueling Grounds and Icy Manipulator. I control Sun Titan and Grave Titan with Lightning Bolt in hand and a mountain in my graveyard. It's my pre-combat main phase. An attack with Sun Titan would be lethal, so I immediately turn Grave Titan sideways and say, attack you, trigger. My opponent interrupts and says, wait. Before combat, I tap down Grave Titan. I say, okay, that's fine, because in that case, I attack you with Sun Titan, trigger, bring back the land, 6 damage, bolt you, 3 more damage, you're dead. Baiting the Icy onto the non-lethal threat, genius or grifter. And then this is also interesting because Kyle adds, P.S. I'll admit, I legitimately don't know how this works in a tournament setting. Does shortcutting straight to the declare attacker step to show your intent to attack with a certain creature lock you into that attack declaration? Does the opponent rewinding that shortcut and doing something to affect the board state mean you get to then advance to the declare attackers and change from the original attack? If the above situation is actually a rules violation, then maybe just replace the fake attack with me saying something like, Dueling Grounds won't stop my zombies before moving to combat. The bait situation still applies, so genius or grifter in that case. Great question, Kyle. So there's 2 things to cover here. One is this touches on what I talked about either last week or the week before about really brushing up on how the combat step works if you're a primarily arena or MTGO player over the last couple of years, because that would answer this question for you. You are actually in a legitimate gray area. If you skip the stop before the declare attacker step by just starting to go to attacks, your opponent is 100% able to back you up and say, I have an effect during pre-combat or before declare attackers. So you have to rewind, and you would have to. There is an issue here though. If you do just skip forward and go to attacks and your opponent doesn't do anything at that point and say, whoa, I want to back up, you don't get to back up either. So you have now attacked and you are locked into that attack. So in this case, that wouldn't matter because you wanted to do that with both of your creatures, but there you are giving up a little bit of something by doing this. If you are going to skip that, you can choose whichever creatures to declare however you'd like, and it would be somewhat normal for you to say trigger. There's some issues here, though. The first one is, if you did it exactly how you described, where you say, okay, Grave Titan attacks trigger, the trigger can only happen after you've declared attacks with everything. So at that point, your opponent actually could just say, okay. You can't then go, and then I'll also attack with my Sun Titan and trigger this too. You declare all your attackers at the exact same time, and then triggers happen. So if your opponent was really astute, really up on this stuff, and recognized the lethality of the situation, which I assume they weren't aware of the lightning bolt, so they didn't know. But let's just say that they had an idea that you had a lightning bolt in hand. You actually would have screwed yourself there, because they could say, okay, you got your attack in, I'll chump block your Grave Titan. Yes, you got your zombies, but you did not get an attack with Sun Titan at all. You don't get your land back, and you don't put that extra pressure on me. So the way that it works, just to be clear here, and the way that you should play it, rather than this type of stuff, because even though this isn't technically grifter, because you are allowed to skip that step on your own and force your opponent to kind of say, I need to back up, I still think it's enough of a overstep or an angle shot that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it, really. Because the way it's supposed to work is, you're in your main phase. Let's say you play a land. You don't do anything else. Your opponent has no opportunity to do anything. Remember, they can't respond to you playing a land, and they can't do anything if you have priority. So what's really happening is you say, I'd like to go to combat. And that's what you need to say to your opponent every single time. And if they say, okay, then you're now in combat, right? The way that I word it is, I'd like to declare attackers, or declare attackers. And what I'm really saying is, I want to end my main phase. I want to go into beginning of combat. Then I want to skip past that, and I want to go into declare attacker step. That's what I'm asking you. And if you say, okay, we are in the declare attacker step. You do not get to do anything at the end of my main phase, where you do have priority. You do not get to do anything at the end of my beginning of combat step, where you also have priority. I have passed priority through both, and I have told you that is how I am planning on doing this. So that to me is how you should handle these situations going forward, because trying to get somebody on a gotcha to me isn't really the best way to try to play the game. But people often shortcut through those two phases. They play a land and they say, okay, I'm going to attack you with this, this, and this. And they don't ask you, can I go to attackers? Because in the vast majority of situations, there isn't anything that the player's going to do anyway. So it's easier to just say, okay, I want to attack you with and the person goes, hold on, I do have an effect before combat or before declare attackers. And you go, oh, okay. And then they go, I'll use this blue spell to tap down your two biggest things. And they go, okay. And then that pops up every once in a while. So I do tend to ask, I'll just go attackers. Yep. Okay. And then declare my attackers. And then usually they'll say, go to blocks. And I say, yep. And then they go to blocks. And then at that point, I'll say, I'll pass priority. Like if I don't have anything to do. And then I get to see if they have combat tricks or if they want to do anything. And that's what I recommend doing for you too, Kyle. I do think that what you described here is legal in the sense of it is very common to skip those two steps, but your opponent absolutely has the right to say, actually, before you declare attackers, I do have an effect. I have IC Manipulator. And so before, after at the end of your beginning of combat step, I want to tap down your Grave Titan. And you go, okay. And then you kill them, right? Or they tap down the Sun Titan and you attack them with Gravy Train. That is that does happen all the time. You saying that you want to put the trigger on the stack, I think is just a mistake on your part, because you do want to leave yourself the ability to attack with any other creatures that you might have. Great question. That was a really good Genius or Grifter, because it really hits that kind of meaty center of it all, where it's like, well, you are allowed to do that, but you are definitely trying to deceive your opponent. And like I said, I think I would prefer to see you just play it straight up. But you do have a little bit of wiggle room there. All right, that's going to do it for this one. I want to say thanks to everybody who asked these awesome questions, and hopefully the episode's okay. Next week, we will have Sirkovitz on, and then we'll have a guest the week after that, and then Luis will be back from his trip. So this is the only one you'll have to put up with, just you and I. That is going to do it for this one, though. If you want to find me on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. We'll give him a shout out since, he's on the show sometimes. If you want to find anything related to the podcast, it's lrcast.com. And you can find everything related to the show there. I want to thank our sponsors, channelfireball.com and FTX. We do appreciate them for supporting the show. And that is going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week. Okay, so I have to do my own sign off. I want to revisit... I mentioned Kenji Lopez Alt last time, my favorite book author and cook. And I mentioned that he had come out with a new book, The Walk, which I've really, really liked. But I also mentioned it briefly, but I want to hit it a little harder, which is his YouTube channel. He has a really... when somebody just gets it, when you sync up with them, like as a content creator, I'm like, this person gets it. This is how I would do that. This person understands what's important and what's not. And what he does is he just puts on a GoPro in his kitchen at home. And then he cooks the things that he would be cooking, but he teaches you how to do it. And he doesn't stick to specific recipes, super hardcore. He will use what he has in his kitchen to kind of show you, hey, you can mess around with these recipes. You can try different stuff out. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect every time. It doesn't have to be exactly the same every time. And he's excellent at that. And he'll talk you through and give you pointers and tips and little tidbits and stuff too. So, if you haven't noticed, I'm a pretty big fan and I highly recommend checking out his YouTube channel as well. It's just Kenji Lopez-Alt, ALT.